The grandmother takes the family to Ohio. I think the grandfather is dead by then. And Ohio, being in the Northwest Territory, was, by virtue of its original charter, never allowed slavery. And some say that's why he went. I know that's why General Burnside's parents went to Indiana for the same reason, to get away from slavery. His father died when he was quite young. His father was, I wouldn't say a ne'er-do-well, but he certainly wasn't very practical. He left his wife in debt with several children, with no income at all.
Well, first of all, he was truly one of the great abolitionists of all times, and one of the great just enemies of slavery from the time he was a child. You know, in the podcast in 1865, he mentions a few times, you know, that he swore an eternal oath, that his father made him swear an oath to fight slavery for his entire life, and that by God he was going to stick to that oath and he was going to defeat slavery.
He studies the classics, classical history, and the sciences to a degree, preparing himself for he doesn't know what. Eventually he gravitates to the law. But he just wants to get an education, and he had an opportunity to study law with someone in his hometown, and he took it. He was accustomed to being poor. He hated it. I'm sure he hated being looked down on by people in town, or being viewed as a subject of charity, as his mother was often. So he saw the law as a place to make a decent living. They were suing a fellow who had violated his patent on the McCormick Reaper. And this agent thought that the trial was going to take place in Chicago. Well, Abraham Lincoln knew the judge in Chicago, and it's an old rule of thumb in law, it's better to know the judge than to know the law. And so they gave Lincoln a retainer, and they weren't terribly impressed with Lincoln. I mean, he didn't have a national reputation by any means at the time, but he knew the judge. Then the trial was convened in Cincinnati instead, and the judge there was John McLean, whom Stanton knew. So they hired Stanton. Stanton really didn't have anything to do with Lincoln not being accepted on the case, but they just didn't have the decency to tell him, no, we're not going to need you. And he had prepped for the case, and he had a brief that he presented to them. They just didn't listen to it. And he sat through the trial and was ignored by his co-counsel.
Edwin Stanton snubbed Abraham Lincoln as a backwoods, useless, hick country lawyer, and didn't invite him to a dinner of all the other lawyers.
He basically called him a useless idiot. He was a terrible lawyer. He was a terrible public speaker. He was he saw no value in this guy whatsoever. But then something happened along the way in their relationship where he saw Lincoln in a completely different light.